There are more domestic donkeys alive right now than there are lions, tigers, and wolves combined. Something close to 50 million of them, spread across 5 continents, hauling water and firewood and market goods on backs so familiar you stop seeing them. You have probably walked past one without a second glance, maybe on a farm road, maybe in a photograph from someone else's vacation. Picture the animal you already know. Long ears, a dark stripe running down the spine, a stubborn set to the jaw. Your mental picture likely files it right next to the horse, a smaller cousin, domesticated somewhere along the same general path, in roughly the same general place, at roughly the same general time. That picture feels complete. It has felt complete for most of recorded history, passed down without anyone checking it. Almost nobody who owns one, rides one, or photographs one on vacation could actually tell you where it came from. Not the country, not the continent. 50 million animals, and the family tree underneath every single one of them was, until fairly recently, mostly guesswork, dressed up as settled fact. Start with the crack in that picture. A donkey is not a small horse. It never was. Donkeys and horses split from a shared ancestor millions of years ago and have gone their separate genetic ways ever since. Different chromosome counts included, different behavior, different everything underneath the resemblance. So the real question researchers needed to answer was never, where do donkeys come from? It was narrower than that and considerably harder to pin down. Out of a dozen or more wild-ass populations scattered across 2 continents, some thriving, some barely holding on, which single one is the actual mother line? That question sounds simple from the outside. It is not. Answering it meant looking somewhere the naked eye is useless. Mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed only from mother to offspring, generation after generation, largely unchanged along the way. In 2004, a team led by geneticist Albano Beja Pereira published a study in the journal Science built entirely around this method. They sequenced mitochondrial DNA from domestic donkeys across Africa, Asia, and Europe, pulling samples from working animals, market animals, animals nobody had ever thought to test before. Then they compared every one of those sequences against wild-ass populations, living and recently vanished, wherever usable tissue existed. The scale was the entire point of the study. Not one wild ass tested against donkeys, not 2. Every branch of the family anyone had ever managed to sample laid side by side. The question had stayed open for a simple, frustrating reason. Wild asses look nearly identical to each other from any distance that matters. Long ears, pale bellies, faint striping on the legs, bodies built for scrubland and desert heat. A single specimen, collected and mislabeled in the 1800s, could send a whole line of research down the wrong branch for 100 years afterward. Worse, several wild-ass populations were being hunted toward extinction at the exact moment researchers needed clean tissue from them, which meant some of the most important samples came from animals that were already functionally gone by the time anyone thought to test them. Mitochondrial DNA cut through the mess because it tracks one line only, the maternal one, straight through centuries of crossbreeding on the paternal side. What it was about to reveal would widen the family tree before it narrowed anything at all. Before any elimination could begin, the family itself needed introducing, because it turned out to be far bigger and stranger than most people ever assume. The Somali wildass survives today only in the Horn of Africa. Its total population smaller than most small towns, likely under 200 animals left in the wild, watched over by a handful of conservationists who can probably name each surviving individual. Its legs carry some of the sharpest, most precise, natural striping of any equid alive, bands so clean and so evenly spaced they look hand-painted rather than grown. Farther east, across the deserts of Iran, lives the onager, a wild-ass stockier and heavier set than a horse, but reportedly capable of outrunning one over short distances, a build that looks slow from a distance and is not. Higher still, on the Tibetan Plateau, the kiang grazes at altitudes above 4,000 meters, higher than almost any other large mammal on the planet, thriving in air too thin for most livestock, in temperatures that drop far below freezing most nights of the year. And then there is the one that no longer exists anywhere at all, the Syrian wildass, the smallest wild equid ever documented by scientists, once common enough to be hunted for sport across the Arabian desert, driven to extinction within a few human generations. with the last known individual dying in a Vienna zoo in 1927. There is a fifth cousin too, easy to miss. The Indian wild ass, or cur, holding on in a single salt-flat region of western India, a landscape so harsh that almost nothing else large enough to see survives there year-round. 5 branches of one family, stretched from the Horn of Africa to the edge of the Himalayas. 5 animals that share a silhouette, a long-eared dust-colored outline, and almost nothing else underneath it. None of them, on the surface, obviously the one researchers were looking for. Here is where the expectation comes in, the one every researcher walked into this study already holding. Donkeys have been ridden, loaded, and traded across Asia and the Middle East for thousands of years, in some regions longer than the horse has been used at all. If geography were destiny, the ancestor should have 4 legs and a home somewhere between Persia and Tibet. Everything about how humans actually used donkeys pointed east, toward the onager, toward the kiang, toward that whole Asian half of the family tree. That was the working theory going in, built on real fieldwork and centuries of written trade records, not idle guesswork. It was reasonable. It was specific. It matched everything anyone had ever written down, and the genetic data had not yet had its say. It started with the kiang, and it ended fast. Kiangs share the wild-ass body plan and little else. Every attempt to breed one in captivity, even alongside its closest cousins, has failed outright, a pattern seen nowhere else in the family, as if the split ran deeper than biology alone can explain. On the genetic tree, its branch splits off earliest of all, farther from domestic donkeys than any other wild ass tested, a first cut that was almost too clean to be interesting. 1 branch down, several to go, and the map had already lost its tallest, coldest candidate. Next came the Syrian wild ass, and here the problem was not the DNA so much as finding any left to test. Extinct since 1927, represented today by a handful of museum skins collected decades before anyone thought to preserve tissue for genetic work. What could be recovered placed it firmly inside the Asian branch of the family, alongside the onager and the kiang, nowhere close to the maternal line running through domestic donkeys. An entire subspecies, gone, and still useful only as a data point ruling itself out. Then the onager, the favorite, the animal the whole theory had been built around, the one every trade record seemed to point straight at. Here, the elimination came from somewhere unexpected, not the mitochondrial sequence alone, but the chromosome count sitting underneath it. Domestic donkeys carry 62 chromosomes. Onagers carry somewhere between 54 and 56, depending on the subspecies. That is not a small mismatch. It is the kind of structural gap that makes direct ancestry essentially impossible, whatever the historical trade routes might suggest. Thousands of years of donkeys carrying goods across Persian trade roads, camel caravans and mountain passes and all of it, and still, genetically, a dead end. The Indian wild ass, or her, went next, eliminated almost as an afterthought once the pattern was clear. Its DNA sat closer to the onager than to anything African. One more confirmation that the entire Asian side of the family, every branch of it, was heading in the wrong direction. 4 candidates down, 1 entire continent's worth of possibilities exhausted. The whole eastern half of the map, the half every researcher had expected to win before the sequencing started, was empty. That left Africa, and within Africa, the Somali wild ass came closest of anyone so far, close enough that some researchers assumed the search was over. Its mitochondrial DNA showed up inside some domestic donkey lineages, a genuine partial match, not a dead end like the others, but only some, not the majority. The Somali wild ass, it turned out, contributes to part of the picture without being the dominant maternal source, a near miss from an animal whose entire wild population, all 200 or so of them, could fit inside a single stadium. Close. Not quite it. 1 branch of the African wild ass family remained untested by elimination because, for a long time, almost nobody could get a usable sample from it at all. It lived farther north than its Somali cousin, along a river that has shaped more human history than almost any other stretch of water on the planet, and it had not been reliably documented alive in the wild for decades. Researchers had all but written it off as a candidate before the sequencing even began. Every Asian branch was gone. Every African branch but one was gone. What was left was a single population that used to live along the Nile, a population most researchers assumed was either functionally extinct or too rare and too scattered to matter for a study like this at all. The mitochondrial sequences from that last population matched the majority of domestic donkeys tested, across continents, across breeds, across thousands of years of separate history and separate human use. The ancestor of something close to 50 million living animals is the Nubian wild ass, Equus africanus, not the onager, not the kiang, not the animal every trade route and every history book pointed toward. A quiet, Nile-adjacent population that most people alive today have never heard of, that appears in almost no popular account of donkey history, and that almost nobody has confirmed seeing alive in the wild since the 1970s. The match is not partial, and it is not disputed. It is the dominant maternal line behind the majority of domestic donkeys on Earth. Full stop, no asterisk attached. That should have been the end of the story. A wild population identified, a domestic species explained, case closed, credits ready to roll. But the Nubian wild ass is not where this family begins. It is not even close to where it begins. Follow the lineage back far enough, past the wild asses, past the earliest zebras and onagers, and every extinct cousin ever sketched into a museum diagram. And the trail does not lead to Africa or Asia at all. It leads to North America. The entire equid family, every horse, every zebra, every wild ass that has ever lived, evolved there first, across some 50 million years, through dozens of genera that no longer exist anywhere on Earth. Small forest browsers gradually became the open plains runners we would recognize today, all of it happening on a continent that, right now, has no native wild equid left on it at all. At some point, populations crossed into Asia, then into Africa, spreading the family across 2 more continents entirely. And then, around 11,000 years ago, at the close of the last ice age, the entire North American branch died out. Mammoths went with it. Saber-toothed cats went with it. The horses and asses that had originated there, the whole reason any of this family exists anywhere, vanished from their own homeland completely. The wild horses running across Nevada today are not native wildlife returning to old ground, whatever the postcards suggest. They are descendants of animals brought back by Spanish colonizers, a homecoming 500 years after the original population disappeared entirely. The donkey standing in a field, the one nobody could place at the start of this, traces its maternal line to the Nubian wild ass, and through it, back to a family that began on a continent where its entire kind had already gone extinct once before, 10,000 years before anyone ever climbed on a horse's back. The genetics did not stand alone. In 2008, a separate team, working not with DNA but with shovels and bone, excavated a set of graves at Abydos, in Egypt, dated to roughly 3000 BCE, among the oldest known burials of equids anywhere in the archaeological record, older than most of the monuments most people associate with ancient Egypt at all. The skeletons inside belonged to donkeys, and their spines told their own story, independent of any lab. Researchers found stress patterns and joint damage consistent with years of carrying heavy loads, the physical signature of a working pack animal, not a wild one recently captured and buried for ritual alone. These were already domesticated donkeys, in the right place, at a plausible early date, discovered without any reference to the genetic study at all by archaeologists who were not trying to answer the same question the geneticists were. 2 completely different disciplines, one built from molecules too small to see under any ordinary microscope, the other from bones dug carefully out of desert sand, converging on the same corner of northeastern Africa, the same general window of time, the same conclusion. Neither method depended on the other. Neither one was looking to confirm the other. They simply landed in the same place, decades apart, using nothing in common but the ground and the genome. The numbers underneath this story are just as exact as the story itself. Domestic donkeys carry 62 chromosomes. Domestic horses carry 64. Przewalski's horse, the closest thing left to a truly wild horse, carries 66. That 2-chromosome gap between donkeys and horses is not decoration. It is the reason a mule, the offspring of the two, is almost always sterile, a mismatch written into every single cell of its body. Now set that against time, because the 2 numbers do not belong on the same scale at all. Horses split away from the donkey's own lineage somewhere around 4 million years ago, long before anything resembling a modern human existed to notice. Domestication of the donkey itself happened only 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, a sliver of time by comparison, barely a rounding error against 4 million years of separate evolution. 4 million years of divergence on one side of the equation. 7,000, barely a blink by comparison, on the other. The chromosome count is not a footnote to the family tree. It is the family tree, counted out in a language older than any language humans ever wrote down, indifferent to trade routes, indifferent to which continent seemed more convenient. You have probably stood near one of these animals without knowing any of this. At a petting zoo, on a beach ride, behind a fence on a relative's farm, ears swiveling, patient in a way that gets mistaken for stubbornness. Every donkey that has ever hauled water up a hillside carries this. Every donkey that has ever waited at a market stall carries this. Every mule ever bred from a donkey and a horse carries the exact chromosome mismatch that makes it, more often than not, the last of its own line. None of them look like the ending to an evolutionary story that started on a continent where their entire family no longer exists. None of them look like the answer to a question that took genetics, archaeology, and a river valley in Egypt to finally settle. But they are. 50 million animals, one extinct in the wild ancestor, and a single match that took a global comparison to finally uncover.